All right, so there's this study. It's called Pandemics, Protests, and Firearms. It came out of the University of California, Riverside. A couple of researchers there just put it out. And basically, what they did is they looked at gun purchases. And they found that there's a huge number of gun background checks being done right now because anytime someone buys a gun from like a gun store, it goes through like a federal system, so on and so forth. So we know kind of how many guns are being bought. They used monthly level state data, and they found that looking at those background check rates between March and June, you'll see that there were two huge surges kind of in gun purchases. One was around COVID-19, and the other one was around all these like police involved protests. What's really interesting about these spikes is that, we often think about maybe people on the political right panic buying guns after a mass shooting that's prominent in the media because they think guns are going to get banned or restricted, so they buy a bunch of guns. But what's really interesting about this is that the effect is indistinguishable in like blue states and red states. Like in both places, tons and tons of people are buying guns. And you can actually see within some of the evidence in the paper that actually a lot of these are first-time gun buyers. So it's not even like someone who's like a hobbyist or who collects guns or who's done this before. A lot of people are buying a gun for the first time. And it seems like it's across, Democratic and Republican party states. And so, is this like a new thing in America? Are like a lot of people who just previously didn't think a gun was useful or worthy of their attention, now they're arming themselves. And to me that suggests that we might have some really scary times ahead of us, because if people who have no experience with firearms, have no training with them, are buying them purely out of fear, we could be seeing a lot of shootings in our future, crimes, suicides, accidental shootings, things like that. What do you guys?
Yeah, I mean, like the common link. It seems like there's an obvious common link between like the pandemic and the riots, which is that it's just increasing uncertainty, right? So it makes sense on an intuitive sense that people are like just really uncertain about the future and they don't know whether they may need protection if shit hits the fan. But like, it's weird. So there's a common link there, but I don't see I don't really understand why it's happening now and it wouldn't have happened before with other similar events, right? Like there's been riots in American history in cities over the past 50 years. And I don't really remember, although maybe the data would confirm this, I don't know, but I don't really remember there being a big surge of gun buying based on scary things happening in the country before. So, I just wonder if there's something unique about this period that is making people feel that, if there's uncertainty right now, whether it's a pandemic or it's, civil unrest, I need to get a gun. Like that to me is not really clear and obvious.
There's always a surge every time there's a new Democrat president.
So yeah, but that's a totally different thing, right? Like as Zed was saying, like that is driven by like gun rights. I don't want to say activism necessarily, but just like people who are worried about, those are probably people who already own a lot of guns, or at least one gun, right? Those are previous gun owners who are, it's driven by gun enthusiasm, right? It's driven by people who like want to make sure that they're going to be able to get that gun that they've had their eye on, or just, I don't think that's a lot of first-time gun owners.
What's really interesting is that in March, so that's when the shutdown started, there was a record number of gun background checks. There's 3.7 million of them, right? And then in June, when the protests and riots started, there was another record set of 3.9 million firearm background checks. And the researchers say that this was basically, it was a 43% increase in background checks during the COVID-19 outbreak in March. And then it was a 47% increase during the George Floyd protests. Then they actually looked at like what the effect is comparing it to a mass shooting, and they found that the effects were like 4 to 6 times larger than the increase in background checks following the average mass shooting. So like this is really huge. Like this is almost like unprecedented surge of gun buying. At least looking at all the data they have going back to 1999. We don't know what it would have been if you'd gone back further, I guess, but at least in like modern recent history, like this is fairly unprecedented, the amount of weapons people are buying. And this is legally. They're getting this data because of the background check system, because they're doing it legally. We don't know what's happening like under the table, black market, at kind of gun shows, which have loopholes in many states.
I feel like there's a general sort of there's a path towards this sort of libertarian dystopia that we're creeping towards. I mean, you have a pandemic in which the government's response has been absolutely abysmal, to the point where 50% of Americans are not willing to take a COVID vaccine if it were invented. And I think a lot of that distrust comes from the New York Times did a piece on this about how a lot of this distrust comes from just distrust of the Trump administration, right? Anything that the Trump administration develops, people are just not willing to risk themselves and their family's livelihood, their family's health on. So there's the utter screw up of the federal government to handle the pandemic, plus this national distrust of police, like the most fundamental service of government to protect citizens' lives, has been called into question in a historic way. These currents kind of coming together. And then there's just this kind of like general lawlessness with the riots, the wave of riots, and then after that the whole fireworks thing that not the biggest deal in the world. Obviously, it was just a little bit irritating, but it kind of felt like, at least around where I live, it felt like there was this backdrop of just general kind of chaos and lawlessness that the fireworks just kind of vividly symbolized. So it's just like in the air that every man is for himself. And if you want to protect yourself, you can't rely on government to do it. You're out on your own. It just feels like that's the cultural moment that we're in.
Yeah, I feel like maybe the pandemic could qualify as like the greatest loss of confidence in government, like in history. I mean, I can't really think of another comparison, right?
It's like Katrina, but nationwide.
Right. It's a nationwide Katrina, essentially, right? Like, I mean, maybe there was a period, I don't know, was there a period after September 11? I feel like that was more of like a rally moment rather than, when there's an attack, right? Like when there's some kind of military attack or a war or something, that doesn't really, even if something goes poorly, it doesn't really cause the country to lose confidence. It causes people to just sort of rally even more, right?
Right.
And maybe that's a natural and smart response when you're in a conflict. You don't want to abandon your cause. You want to fortify it, right? You want to band together with the people that are on your side. But with the pandemic, it's like there's no rallying really, because that's just not really going to help. And so it's just really this massive loss of confidence. I think maybe another part of this, and maybe this is actually related, is that like the pandemic really it sort of brought the whole prepper culture to like the mainstream, like that was something that's been around for quite a while. It's, it's sort of this like doomsday-ish like mentality. Not to use a pejorative. I mean, there's a lot of smart aspects to like making sure, you have like food and water in your home and in case of emergency. But like that wasn't really like this mainstream thing until the pandemic hit. And then like everyone got really serious, or a large like percentage of the population started being exposed to like these ideas about like, what's a go bag, right? Like it's like stuff that you need to have in a bag in case you need to like get out really quick. And I think a big part of prepper culture is like guns, and so I think it was this kind of like gateway drug in a way. And then after the pandemic, with the riots, that sort of just like that idea just sort of stuck around, so that all these people who had sort of been introduced to the idea of, oh, I better have my shit together in case shit hits the fan, I better be prepared. And so coming out of not out of the pandemic, but kind of from the pandemic directly into these riots, I think a lot of people sort of just kind of had that idea still floating in the air. And so it was sort of like this booster shot to like renew that like possible need for defending yourself, arming yourself.
There's also, I don't know that there have been any studies on this, but there's also the fact that we've been isolated from each other for months now. I mean, I just can't imagine that it wouldn't have an impact, that people have not been physically in contact with each other, seeing each other at work, seeing their family, their extended family members in person, giving them hugs, going out in public and feeling fine about being in close proximity with other people. It's like we're in a moment where, by necessity, we're isolating ourselves in our homes. We look at other people with real distrust, not in a moral way, but in just like you might catch a bug from them. So you give them a 6-foot berth or 10-foot berth, I feel like that plays so perfectly into these other themes of like, you're on your own. The government's not here to help you. The government's ineffective to help you and maybe isn't on your side. Big Pharma isn't on your side, right? We already had the anti-vax current going through, which, is totally irrational, but is based in some actual rational suspicions of the intents of the interest of Big Pharma. It just feels like there's been almost a social conditioning towards I don't know how to say it, embracing or accepting, or it's towards being inured to the idea of a breakdown of the social order.
I wrote an article back in February before we really knew this. Well, maybe you guys actually, I think, were talking about this virus back in February. I remember that. So you guys are the oracles. But before most people actually were thinking about this virus, I wrote reported an article on a study looking at basically some researchers looked at 33 different nations. They looked at how they responded over history on different contexts. And what they found is that when there's some kind of ecological threat to people, they get much more prejudiced. Like their cultures get much more tight. They get more distrusting. And that includes, when I was writing it, I was thinking about climate change, because they looked a lot at things related to climate change, like changes to the environment, things like that. But one of the factors they noted in their paper was disease. This is one of the most consistent things, like across history, is like when there's disease, people will get very tight. They get kind of distrustful. They get more prejudiced against people they perceive to be outsiders. So it's really not much of a surprise if you think about it in that it seemed like both the protests and riots, which maybe you would associate with crime, and people sometimes buy up weapons when they're concerned about crime, but also even the virus. Like in general, people were just way less trusting of other people when there's a virus. Because right now, like, we're not even, if there's a stranger who doesn't live with you, you're not even supposed to touch them, right? You're not supposed to like shake their hand or anything. That powerful like part of our culture that we probably on a normal day, millions of people do it every single day, is they shake someone's hand, they hug them, they talk to them, they interact with people. It's just been cut off. And so it's actually fairly interesting that we had two of these huge events back to back that are causing people to buy weapons. And I'm just thinking, what's going to happen with all these firearms out there? Not only with these legal purchases, but actually during the rioting, quite a few kind of like firearm stores and gun stores were looted, and those are illegal weapons. So we don't even know like where those are, who owns them, what they're going to do with them. And I say this as someone who generally like supports the right to buy a gun if you need one to protect yourself. Like, okay, but buying them up in a panic like this, like I can't imagine what's going to happen as a result.